Welcome into the DNVR Rockies Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Lyons, and on today's show, we will be welcoming in Braiden Ward of DNVR Nuggets, and he's here with us right now. Okay, how you doing, Brennan?
I'm good, Patrick. How are you, man? Sorry to crash your party here.
Yeah, no, that's okay. You're going to join us and talk about some prospects for a little while, and then we'll get to our conversation about maybe there's something that the Denver Nuggets could possibly teach the Colorado Rockies, not about winning a championship, because that might be an impossibility, but at least just winning some ball games. How about that?
That's a good place to start. I think winning ball games is a nice bar.
And maybe the owners can talk with each other and learn a thing or two about owning and being a good owner.
Suddenly a different perspective on the Kroenkes as owners, and I think it's well earned, However one may feel about the Kroenkes, they have results now in several different arenas. So they actually might be a good example in some ways, which we'll touch on for professional orgs.
For sure. Yeah, our prospects of the week jump off in AAA. Our first two-time winner, Michael Toglia, he won it last week. He continued to rake down at the Pacific Coast League. 3 homers, 12 RBI. And again, you love the walk to strikeout ratio. 3 walks, only 3 strikeouts. Tip of the cap to Jonathan Morales, Jimmy Herron, Alan Trejo, and Winton Bernard. He's back. Brendan, I don't know if you kept tabs on him a little bit last year. He was one of the better stories, a guy who was a career minor leaguer. He was unfortunately released, but fortunately for Rockies fans, especially those that got to really love him in Albuquerque the last couple of years, he's back now with the organization and playing with the Ice Topes once again in AAA.
Nice. That's a good feel-good story. He's older than I am, though, right? I mean, it's hard. Was he like 33 now?
I would have said 32, but I mean, he's right around there. And again, for a guy who's just starting to get, big league service time, we might see him again this year. Really, there's no limit on how many just new faces we have cycling through at Coors Field.
What's there to lose, man? What is there to lose? And I think, honestly, all jokes aside, that's a legit cool feel-good story. I like seeing those all around baseball. So that's something Rockies fans can hang their hat on. Quick question for you. What's more exciting for you, talking and watching about the pro team or digging into these prospects and thinking about the future? Because I know your responsibilities have you in the present, but as a romantic and a fan of baseball, I'm sure looking down the road gives you a little more meat on the bone.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very close to 50-50. I would almost give an edge to the future, to looking down in the minors. Now, again, the job is covering the Colorado Rockies, so we're going to do that, and with that, the minor leagues. But there's so much stuff that's happening at the big league level that gets all our attention. As far as like the excitement level, it does get a little bit more digging into the numbers of these minor league guys, learning about their stories, getting a chance to talk with some of them, because a lot of those guys will come up. I mean, Coco Montes was one of those guys for me a couple years ago, getting on the Coco bandwagon and say, this guy is something. He might not be a future all-star, but he's absolutely something. And that's exciting to think about over the course of a couple seasons. And then when he finally debuts, it feels good to know that work that you put in previous years kind of paid off. Unfortunately, he today was optioned down to AAA, but ahead of that Houston Astros series. But it's a lot of fun. And you know what? And right now in our community, I've mentioned them a couple times on the podcast, and I've enjoyed being on their podcast. But Blake Street Banner is a group of guys that are, covering the minor leagues extensively and looking throughout the organization to say, hey, maybe this guy could be an all-star, or maybe this is a guy that could be just utilized in the bullpen and shouldn't be like overlooked. So they're doing the yeoman's work when it comes to that. So it is fun. It is definitely a lot of fun looking at the minor league guys.
You don't get that same experience in basketball. It's not the same thing, but Summer League is just around the corner for us. We'll be headed to Circa in about 4 days. And that's where Nuggets fans can kind of tap into that same thing. Obviously the present for Nuggets fans, super cool and fun. But even after a title, the sickos are already sort of like Ismail Kamagate will play at Summer League. He will not come over this year, but there are still going to be Nuggets fans who spend a month obsessing over how he looks in Vegas. And so the future stuff can be really fun, but it's a bit more fun when the present doesn't feel so depressing.
One of the comments we got from Richard Rose, prospects are relevant Rockies are and will forever be losers. I would have probably thought a lot of Nuggets fans felt that way, and
that's it. It's impossible till it isn't, man. Yep.
So, I mean, and again, we'll get to all that. Honorable mention for the pitchers, Jeff Criswell, who had a really good start, 5 innings pitched, only gave up 1 run, 9 strikeouts. Carl Kaufman, Phillips Valdez, and Riley Pint, another one of those great stories, 2 scoreless innings. In Double-A, Joe Rock coming back in a major way, 5 1/3 innings pitched. Does give up 3 runs, but 12 strikeouts in an Eastern League where guys put bats on the ball. He's the Double-A player of the week. Honorable mention for other pitchers, Nick Garcia, Case Williams, Chris McMahon, a lot of starters having good weeks. And on the hitter side, Yankiel Fernandez, once again, 2 more home runs this week, 3 RBI. Batting average was low, but he walked 6 times. Guys aren't throwing him strikes. That's the bottom line. Only struck out 4 times. Excited to see him in the Futures game coming up in Seattle. And Drew Romo, another solid week, 5 for 11, 2 RBI, only 1 K. I know in the NBA they actually, I can't remember what they call it. They don't call it the Futures game, that's for sure. But they've got
now it's the
freshmen versus sophomores.
I think it's the presented by Kleenex Rookies versus Sophomore Challenge. I believe I probably got the sponsor on Patrick. I'm not keeping up.
Is it Bet365? Maybe it will be at some point.
Yeah, they're going to be taking over the world pretty soon here.
They will be. Braiden Ward is stealing all around the world because this dude is fast. This was really hard to figure out who the player of the week was in High A Spokane. Braiden Ward was the guy that I went with. He hit 444, 8 for 18, 4 walks, 4 strikeouts. He scored 9 runs. That's notable because it's a lot in a week, but the rest of his team only scored 13 runs combined. So the dude was getting on base. Yeah, and guys behind him were putting the ball in play. He was wreaking havoc on the bases. Jordan Beck, another solid week. Really don't know what he has to do to get that call up to Double-A Hartford. He is absolutely ready. 370 on the week, 5 RBI, stolen base. AJ Lewis, Robbie Martin, really good. And then honorable mention for the pitchers, Jared Candy, also deserving of a Player of the Week award there. 6 2/3 innings pitched. Only gave up 1 run, did not walk anybody in his lone start, and struck out 9. Connor Van Scoyac, the guy that just came over in the Mike Moustakas deal, and Carson Palmquist both had really tremendous starts. And then finally in Low A, Ryan Ritter won his 3rd Northwest League Player of the Week award. I think this is the 2nd time he's won our Prospect of the Week award. Went 588, 10 for 17, 8 runs scored, 4 home runs, 6 RBI, 3 walks, 3 Ks. Also props on the pitching side to Jordy Vargas, and the hitters, Jesus Bugarin, Daniel Amaral, Jamari Baylor, Brian Betancourt. You know, there's guys to keep an eye out for because they could be something or they could be absolutely nothing. That is kind of the excitement, in a sense, when it comes to prospects.
Yeah, man, and I definitely disagree with Richard, respectfully. The larger sentiment I understand, but prospects will always be relevant, and for a team like the Rockies, arguably the most relevant thing right now. I mean, if there is a new day, right, you get signs of it now, and it starts by paying attention to what's going on at the various levels. So prospects are particularly relevant in Colorado, I think.
Yeah, Casey Stern from formerly of Sirius XM Radio, MLB Network, used to say prospects are cool, parades are cooler. So
I agree with that.
Again, some of these prospects pan out, they get you close to the parade, then you trade other prospects and you put the cap on the parade. And we'll absolutely be talking about that here in 1 second. But first, we want to tell you how to turn $1 into $200 of bonus bets when you join Bet365. All you got to do is download the app, deposit $10, claim your $200 in bonus bets as soon as you place a $1 bet. That's it. Download the Bet365 app and use promo code DNVR365 when you sign up. Now, Bet365, they have pioneered live in-game betting. They offer the widest range of games and markets available for live in-game betting. They've got over 80 million users worldwide. They've got just under 1 million live stream events each year, and they are a proud partner right now of the Colorado Rockies. So get yourself a better price on chosen markets for select games with Bet365 Boosts or Bet365 Super Boost. No Rockies game today, but that's okay because they boosted a nice 3-leg parlay for tonight's Angels-Padres game. And keep in mind, with the Bet365 baseball early payout offer, you're a winner if your team goes 5 runs ahead with an instant payout. Parlay and same-game parlay selections will be marked as winners. Download the app and use code DNVR365 when you sign up. Must be 21 or older, physically located in Colorado. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call or text 1-800 gambler. What's not a gamble is saving money on your tickets. So Game Time Tickets is the spot to go. You're either going to save money by waiting closer to the start of an event, up to about an hour and a half. So you're hanging out in the area, downtown, wherever there's something going on, and you go ahead and say, you know what, I do want to go to this game. Prices are really starting to drop. Some of these scalpers, they just want to get a couple bucks. You do that with Game Time Tickets. Or if it is a big event that a lot of folks are going to, save $20. Put an extra $20 in your pocket by using code DNVR when you use Game Time, because look, you can join over 15 million folks who already love Game Time and Game Time Tickets. Were there a lot of folks that were able to get good buys on Game Time Tickets for the NBA Finals, or did they just say, you know what, we'll take the $20 savings, put it in our pocket, put that towards a jersey or a shirt?
There were some good deals, I think, and there were people who were willing to pony up, man. Obviously, you're finding great deals at Game Time to begin with, but any finals ticket is expensive, and there were people from all around the country, man, that flew in because, you know, I talked to people who thought maybe in a few years I'll be in a better financial situation to do this, but will the Nuggets be in the finals? And rightfully viewed as a potentially once-in-a-lifetime situation, and a lot of people got some butts in the seats to see history.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing. And I just wanted to, before we dive into the broader conversation about Nuggets and Rockies and what the Rockies can learn from the Nuggets. I don't know if the Nuggets want to learn anything from the Rockies necessarily. But just, does it feel, is it wearing off, this feeling? I know a couple of the folks on the Nuggets beat said, I can't believe it's over. Like, this thing that has been building for years came, and then you're in the middle of it and every second feels like an hour, but all of those seconds are over. And it's like, all right, let's look ahead to the next season.
Totally. And it's a quick turnaround, man. There's the parade. And then at least in the NBA world, seemed like 2-3 days later, the Bradley Beal trade happens. And it's like, oh, we're doing this already, you know, and you forget other teams have been starting their offseason weeks ago, months ago for some of them. So it went so long. I think that's the part that catches you by surprise. Again, we go to Vegas in 4 days. This is usually, to me, pretty deep into the offseason. So there is a little bit of, it's crazy how it just keeps going. And to me, it actually gave me a newfound respect for those athletes who are insatiable. I think the obvious examples of the mold are Tom Brady, a LeBron James, guys who finally win, and then they just show back up on Monday and go right back to work, you know? And that's because even just as a media member, a part of me is like, hey, we don't want to celebrate this a little more, but the job goes on and the show rolls on. And so it's a funny, you know, especially for folks in the front office, like, you don't really get much time to celebrate the ultimate goal and the ultimate accomplishment. You're working throughout the whole year. Even in the middle of the finals, Calvin Booth made a trade to acquire more draft capital. So it never ends. And there is a little bit of, it almost felt like if the Nuggets were ever going to win the title, the world would end shortly after. And here it is still spinning, you know?
That's a beautiful thing. This is obviously no knock on Nikola Jokić, but what does it mean for him being, you know, the greatest basketball player on the planet right now? Sure, I said it. My DMs are open. Hit me up. But he's not that guy of, hey, Monday morning, let's get back to work, because, you know, or maybe he is in a way. He just want to go back to Serbia. He's like, parade, let's go back to Serbia. I want to play with some horses.
That's exactly it. I think like the aloof disinterest thing can be greatly exaggerated. And I think over the years was even misunderstood at times as a side of his personality, but not necessarily a reflection of his work ethic. Like, Jokić works really, really hard. As much as he is a reluctant hero, he puts the work in to be able to deliver the Nuggets their first ever title, but he does want to get right back to Serbia. And I know he's watching horses and at pubs and having a good time. It's not all, he's definitely not Tom Brady in that way, but is he Tim Duncan, you know, a guy who was famous for taking a lot of time off after the season ends. And in his case, typically ended with him in a deep playoff run, if not a title. He would take a lot of time off and just reset mentally. And there are a lot of Jokić Duncan comps to begin with. So I think he's maybe more cut from that cloth. But again, it's just, to me, I'm just struck by how quickly you wake up the next Monday and it's, are you going to be complacent or are you ready to work for the next one? And it's just startling to me, I think, with all the money and all the reasons to maybe just sort of grow complacent and settle, how many of these guys, the best guys, just wake up and say, no, I think I want more.
Yeah, and we know because we're around these guys, like they're human beings.
Right.
And so I haven't been around Tom Brady. I haven't been around a lot of people in that echelon as you described there. But Jokić and most of the players on the Colorado Rockies, for better or for worse, they have a good balance of that work and their social life and spending time with that family and being able to appreciate that and saying, what's the happy medium, I guess, on all of this to be able to do my job. And that's normal, really, more than anything. So that's certainly not a knock on anyone. Now, Tommy Montalongo in the chat, jumping right in, and there's kind of two things going on with this question here, but very fair for us to just jump in here in the conversation about really what can the Denver Nuggets teach the Colorado Rockies. So Tommy asks on the DNVR Sports channel live on YouTube, what's the biggest issue with the Rockies? Is it the incompetence in the front office, particularly the owner, Dick Monfort, or is it just that the prospects hardly ever pan out? I think the topic of ownership was something that Adam Amadeus, great legendary figure of DNVR and DNVR Nuggets and the Nuggets community as a whole, really jumped off and said, that's kind of the biggest piece for the Rockies. It seems like the owner is holding the Rockies back in the case of Dick Monfort. And for Stan Kroenke, that may have been the case for a period of time.
Sure.
But then it stopped becoming that case. What changed for Stan Kroenke, and is it something that Dick Monfort could figure out to do?
Well, part of it is, the Kroenkes own so many properties, not just teams, but properties. And eventually Stan's attention was needed elsewhere. And ultimately, I think, for some legal reasons in terms of what it means to own teams across different leagues, Josh Kroenke is essentially the face of ownership of the Denver Nuggets and not Stan, although Stan was still there. In fact, the first guy to get the trophy and raise it after they won. So the sort of shadow structure of the ownership was like the veil was lifted there. But so part of it, I think, was that some of it switched over to Josh. And I do think Josh is more passionate about the basketball side of it maybe than Stan is. Not that I know either of them super well. But Josh took over and Josh was interested. But Josh also showed a lot of patience. And what he did was he hired people he trusted. And then he got out of the way. And as many times over the years as it felt like the Nuggets are these redheaded, the ugly redheaded stepchild is, I think, the phrase Josh used at the press conference. Shout out to all the redheads in the chat. But yeah, there you go. But there was also another side to that sword, which is it's really easy to micromanage and ruin an organization as an owner. And every owner seems to have a slightly different philosophy on, does this mean I am the GM or does this mean I am the owner? Jerry Jones is a very famous example in the NFL world of a guy who leans more towards being involved in everything and arguably for the worse, probably for the worse. And so within the context of this conversation, I would, is it fair to wonder, would they have won one or gone further if he was less involved, a franchise of that pedigree and caliber? So you want investment from ownership. And that's probably been the biggest gripe, like financial investment from Nuggets fans over the years. But you don't want them too involved. You want to let the basketball people run basketball operations, and of course, baseball for baseball, and so on. So it needs to be financed. You need to care, but there needs to be a healthy distance between the operations and the ownership level.
You have to let the basketball, or in the Rockies' case, the baseball professionals do their baseball thing, because owners typically aren't that. And I like the example of Jerry Jones, because it does make me think that really when he took over as owner of the Cowboys, essentially in the early 90s, even late 80s, I think, he had like immediate success. So it was like, hey, you know what? Me injecting myself into this team as an owner GM, this is a great formula. And it hasn't really been that since. And I think that was also true for Dick Monfort, kind of when he started really getting involved. It was actually his brother, Charlie Monfort, who was at the head of the Monfort group when they first got into the expansion in 1993, that when Dick kind of started getting involved, they immediately went to a World Series in 2007. And so I'm wondering if there's part of that of, hey, you know what, when I get involved, it's usually good. Now, Monfort's, he has sons that are also in the business, but the Rockies, unlike the Kroenkes, the Rockies are the family business for the
Right.
Monforts. They don't have a lot of other assets and a lot of other teams to get out of the way and say, hey, I can't really focus 162 days of my life on this team for each and every day. Whereas, that's the case for the Kroenkes. They can't focus on all of those things. So they get out of the way. Whereas the Monforts, they're the young guys, Sterling and Walker, they're still young. They're within the organization. They're learning the trade, but that is the only thing that they have going on. So it is more precious to them, and they are more involved, probably to the detriment of the organization to an extent.
Right. It's so hands-on. It's your baby. It's your project. And I would wager that they're quite aware of the noise around town. And on some level, someone with that last name would like to see things change. Right. And so that there's, you grip harder, you grip tighter. And I think maybe it can actually get a little harder to control the car that way, if you'll ride out the crappy analogy. But there's a mix too. I mean, he needs to be involved enough that how he fills out his front office and his operations staff is diligent, right? Backed with the required budget. And it's not, I don't want to say lazy, but it's like you just want to make sure it's an extensive search for the smartest and brightest people that you can put in there. And that's where their involvement needs to be. That's where their money needs to be. Obviously, the stadium's beautiful. There's McGregor Square. Like, there's been enough investment in the sort of aesthetic front face of it. But you got to invest in the operations side, and then you got to find a way to just take your hands off the wheel and say, I am the owner. I am not the GM. I am not the manager. And I did not make all this money in my life by doing those things. So I'm sure I would be bad at this if I was somehow lucky enough to own a team. I think I would be so involved, especially as a sports fan. But you got to let the baseball people do the baseball. And then obviously the first layer of that is making sure you get the right baseball people. And it does seem like sometimes with the Rockies, things are a little too insular and just sort of so maybe, the next step for them might be dipping outside of that pool and that family of relationships, if you will, to bring other people in from the outside and then stepping back and saying, we trust these hires.
They seem like they're fighting against that kind of wholesale change of, hey, these are people we don't know. They're going to change the way we go about things, usually for the better, or hopefully for the better, to win more ball games and possibly get back to the World Series. But to do that is also maybe admitting that you've done some things wrong, doing some things you don't like. Yep. As you said, there's a public perception here in town about what they do. And so I think they very much, they get in their own way by trying not to be in their own way, by, just they try to do middle of the road things. Now, of course, Kris Bryant thing doesn't seem like a middle of the road, but it is when you look at it from the perspective of, hey, we just traded a superstar player. We need somebody to be on billboards that people know. He's a multi-time all-star. We got a lot of Chicagoland people that live in the Denver area. They're going to come out to go see Kris Bryant, who maybe you make the case could be a borderline Hall of Famer guy with a really good 6-7 years in Colorado. And it unfortunately doesn't work out that way, but they are very much worried about the public perception. Was there something on in the early days of the Nuggets that either Kroenke or the team just did in general where it maybe went against public perception at first, or maybe the diehards said, hey, this is a bad thing because it looks like this, but really, you know what, hold on, this could be the start of something changing the culture in some capacity. Was there a moment like that, or maybe you could look back on and say, you know what, this might have been the start of something, and we didn't even realize it at the time?
Yeah, I would say maybe the biggest sliding doors moment in that regard, comparing Josh's decision-making to peers, right, and alternative timelines. When they lost game 82 to Minnesota, I guess now 4 or 5 years ago, and they missed the playoffs by losing that game, Michael Malone expected to get fired. And I think with the way the NBA works, most coaches would expect to get fired in that position. Malone tells the story that Josh comes down, puts his arm around him, and he is jazzed up. He's really excited. He can't believe the position that young team was in down the stretch of the season. And so it turns out he's not worried about that loss. He sees there's something to build on here. And so he doesn't fire Michael Malone. Now, this isn't like a one-to-one example of what might work for the Rockies, but just what worked for him and them. There was a lot of patience. And this isn't a league where there's very little of that. It's extremely rare for the front office, the coaches, and ownership to be on the same page about anything. And I think in Denver, there was a 3 to 4 year period where Josh, Tim, and Mike, on the bigger picture stuff, Michael, were seeing eye to eye about the long term and being patient and letting these guys develop. And that was a pretty rare thing. And in a league where a lot of teams, they're trying to figure out what the next super team is, there's a lot of movement right now. The Nuggets just won a title in large part because of their continuity. And that's not just the core players, but Malone still being there. Even the front office replacement and Calvin worked with Tim. So that they just shuffled him in there. And so there was this, I think, philosophy that ownership facilitated, which was just keep coming back and trying to get better every year instead of hitting the panic button and resetting this whole thing. And that's just so common in the NBA. And it's just so rare to see the Nuggets not only go the way that they went, but for it to pay off for them is hopefully a great thing for basketball. Of course, anything that happens with Jokić on a roster can be viewed as maybe an anomaly, but hopefully it's a sign of, no, there's a way you can do this that's not just musical chairs with the top 7 guys.
If you want to learn how they create great rugby players, they're doing it right here in Denver at Infinity Park in Glendale. Seriously, top athletes from baseball, basketball, football, you name it. They're learning a new sport. They're learning rugby, and you can learn along with them down at Infinity Park. Tickets are just $10. Children 12 and under are free. They got a whole bunch of watch parties going on. You can watch their matches on ESPN+. You can also listen to the DNVR Rugby Podcast with Colton Strickler because he's going to break it down in so many ways. We need to maybe have a little takeover, I think. We're long overdue to take over Infinity Park.
Oh, I'd love that.
That would be a lot of fun. And what's also fun is Shady Rays. I mean, it's fun, but it also looks amazing, especially when you can get 2 for the price of 1. Buy 1, get 1 free. When you use
I've got more coming,
DNVR.
dude. I've got more. They're hooking us up for the Vegas trip. So I'm really excited. I'll probably lose them one day in, but as you just pointed out, not a big risk with Shade Rays.
No, and lost and broken replacement policy. So they'll go ahead and send you some new ones. So are you going to be debuting like 1 per day?
Yeah, well, I only have 2, but I will alternate. Yeah, new flower shirt, different sunglasses every day.
Wow. Okay. Follow Braiden Vogt on Instagram because it's going to be popping off in that way. Do you do Instagram?
I don't actually. I'm such an old man. I'm down to just my Twitter, and even that seems kind of precarious these days, Patrick.
Yes, very much so. But that's okay. You post pics there and with your Shady Rays looking great. And you know what? If you don't look great, Brendan, and this is true for anybody, you can actually get a full refund within 30 days. But you're gonna like it. You can also try them on in person at the Park Meadows Mall. You buy one and you get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized shades from Shady Rays, the independent sunglass company rated 5 stars by over 200,000 folks. You know, I think back to obviously when Jokić was drafted, and you know, in general, like Michael Malone, he inherited a 52-loss team from Brian Shaw and Melvin Hunt. He lost 49 games the next year. But he had Joker. So, like, again, that was also part of the start of something. I think that's when, correct me if I'm wrong, when you kind of jumped on board and said, hold on, there's something here. Yeah, they're towards the bottom of the Western Conference, but this is a young player. This is a guy that could be a superstar going forward. And I just like what they're building in Denver in general. And, yeah, you were right. But is that where it really all started? For you?
Yeah, I mean, so December 15th, 2016, Michael Malone starts Jokić over Nurkic after some great discussion and debate about how that should be handled, and they never looked back. And Malone will joke with you to this day that since then, he hasn't really had to coach offense, and his attention has been on getting this core to defend at a high level, at a championship level. But ever since then, they've been ready to at least build and get better every year. This is where baseball and basketball are so different. A number 1 overall pick, in this case, a 41st overall pick, can change the tide and the momentum of your franchise overnight. It doesn't work that way in baseball. It's first of all, the hit rate on the top 3 picks is such a different thing, right? You're so likely to find a franchise altering player somewhere in the NBA draft in the first 3 picks. In baseball, you just never know. Right? How many of these incredible, highly touted pitchers did we ultimately never hear from, especially with injury stuff? And even in the great scenarios, the best case scenarios, it can still take some time before they reach the next level. So In basketball, it's just a math thing. Having that one guy can change everything. Obviously, there are other boxes to check from there. You have to build out the roster the right way, hit on the margins, find your identity. But it's not the same as baseball, where the Rockies had the best third baseman in the league for so long. And actually, obviously, to be fair, they did compete, and that's easily forgotten at this point. But it's not the same thing as, oh, you have Nolan, you're good. You're going to be ready to compete every year. As Cardinals fans well know, he can be your only good player sometimes, and you're in trouble. So it's not the same thing. But obviously, yes, it all started and it all changed with Jokić. And more importantly, when the team committed to Jokić.
Yeah, Gerardo E. in the comments, management team has to care first. I imagine that is in regards to the Rockies. The strange thing with Rockies front office, and I've had a lot of conversations, even debates with other people inside the media covering the Rockies. I don't truly think that Dick Monfort doesn't care to win a World Series.
Right.
I think he would like to, but I don't think he's going to do it at all costs. They're obviously not. They're not going to bring in, mercenaries, and that's something that I've heard people in the organization describe. When you bring in, like tons of free agents, they like the family vibe in there, and also just again changing the way they go about doing their business. Because if they were to really reflect upon some of the things that haven't been going right, that would require Dick Monfort to take his hands off the steering wheel and let somebody else drive that ship, and let other baseball people that, maybe aren't his buddies. Maybe it might even be people that he might not entirely, see eye to eye with, but respects that person and their decisions. And so doing it that way, certainly would look like he cares, but it's just in a slightly dysfunctional way, I think, because he's continuing, and the organization entirely is continuing to go forward despite the fact that the results just haven't been good, and they're not changing anytime soon.
It's an antiquated approach, right? That's like, it almost feels 30 years old. And again, we forget now, because this is the absolute nadir, that things were for a brief moment much better for the Rockies. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's gotten really bad. And I think it sounds like a full scale philosophy change, right? So it's like, yes, you got to hire these guys, but it starts with that epiphany of just, hey, the way we run this ball club is 30 years old. And this is not how modern front offices are set up, or staffs are set up. And it's not just an old boys club, and it's not just an exercise in nepotism, not that doesn't go on around the league, but it just seems to be like at the forefront of how the Rockies do things. And for a team that seems to have been beating their head against the wall for so many years, you would hope at some point the epiphany comes that maybe this once worked at one point in time, it doesn't anymore. And we are just never going to compete with this style of ownership and this style of filling out our organization and our staff.
Yeah, they've begun to make some changes under Bill Schmidt, general manager, making one trade at the previous two trade deadlines. Not a great look. Was pretty active early on. We'll see if there's more trades, but you like a trade in June. Mike Moustakas going to the Angels for Connor Van Scoyoc, who we just mentioned, got an honorable mention here for the prospects of the week. So there are some things that are changing, but for a team like the Rockies, who they have just all of these disadvantages. And I mean, the Nuggets have had those disadvantages too. I what was it, maybe 2016-17 season where they were 10 games over 500 and they didn't make the postseason in the West because, well, the Western Conference is just loaded with teams. I mean, they would have been like the fifth best record in the East, but not in the West. So when you have all of these disadvantages, I used to say it a lot more than I do, but it still rings true. When you take care of the little things, the big things take care of themselves. And there's unfortunately not enough little things that are done well by the Rockies right now.
Right. That's a great point. And then, as we've talked about on this program so many times together over the last year, I think what so many Rockies fans are just begging for is a commitment to a direction and a plan, and it's going back to that prospect talk. Like, if it just felt like if all of their eggs were in that basket, there'd be a lot more goodwill and patience with the fan base, particularly in the online space. I know people still go to games, but just because then you can actually do the prospect corner to start the show and everyone's pumped because this is what they're thinking about. And anyone who's a fan of baseball in Denver is like, well, there's this class and there's this year in the future where maybe things could get better. But because of the utter refusal to take that approach at trade deadlines and this weird sort of like, well, we don't want to pay these stars. We will give Chris Bryant a shitload of money. There's these weird inconsistencies, and they just need to pick a direction. And from there, you can start. It's a lot easier to start seeing the path. But they got to pick one. And this weird kind of non-contention treading water thing they've been doing, it's not getting them anywhere.
They have a weird sense of pride because, they're not going to tank. They don't even like to say the word rebuild.
Right.
But that is a clear direction that they have not chosen. So they have this pride of like, well, we want it to look competitive, at least for the fans.
Right.
And yet right now there's obviously a lot of apathy within the Rockies community, and people don't care. And, during the World Baseball Classic, so many people that we have at our company that like baseball were reminded, I like baseball. Thank you, World Baseball Classic. Yeah, you reminded me I like baseball, because the Rockies have kind of sucked that joy out. And yet, despite that lack of joy for the Rockies and watching baseball, there's still 40,000+ people that went to the ballpark to see the Detroit Tigers. Yes, there's fireworks, but even still, people are still going out to the game. So Coors Field is really at this point recession proof. So I think if you did rebuild somewhat and didn't have some of those stars, yeah, you'll have people talking more crap and, but the diehards, I think, would be happy and say, this isn't a great look. We lost 100 games 2 years in a row after having never lost 100 games. But man, that farm system is really good.
Looking good.
Promising. Yeah. And there's a couple trades that were made, and we traded a prospect and we got back another prospect that's going to help out, because you're not going to hit on all of them, as you mentioned. So you really need quantity more than you need actual quality. And that's how you build that. Even still, that's not a guarantee at anything, working out.
No, of course.
But it is the one thing that they haven't really tried in a very, very long time.
And you painted the picture nicely. Like, they're competing in this ridiculous division, and and think about the way the Dodgers are trying to win right now, and just the resources at hand. So, okay, you can say we're not tanking, we don't rebuild, we don't use that word. All right. Are you contending? Because you're not. And that, to me, seems so blatantly futile. And so I understand. In some ways, I've talked about this with you too. I respect the almost refusal on principle to just lose on purpose. I do respect that, because this is professional sports. But there are Rockies diehards. This is a community asset. There are people that care. And you got to give them something. And you can't ask them to tread water forever. Because if they can at least have hope in the future, I think you can at least build buzz that way. And as you said, between the transplants and the diehards, people are going to go to the games anyway. So just get the ball rolling on whatever is next, because now it's just not doing it for too many people.
What's next right now is the Breck Brew Mountain Beach Sour. A taste of the beach. We're talking about trying to stay afloat. I mean, that's what you do when you're at the beach. So have some Mountain Beach Sour. You can't come to games in Colorado, can't go to the parade for the Nuggets, but you can get a taste of Colorado with a Colorado company made with 100% ingredients from Colorado. It's absolutely amazing right now, the Mountain Beach Sour. Head to breckbrew.com. Check out the Breck Brew locator to find Breck Brew near you. Do we know, Susie and I have been kicked it around a couple times, do we know if there's a way to have like a Serbian zip code that you could put in the Breck Brew locator where folks out there could get some Breck Brews?
I'm thinking they would have to travel pretty far to get it. So no.
But they would do that.
They would. The Serbians would. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they all have passports anyway. I mean,
it's actually really hard for Serbians to get to the U.S. It's a whole complicated thing, but it's really, really difficult. So that's why we go to visit them. I want to go back, man. I got to go back after that title.
Yeah. Well, you're going to the Serbia of North America very soon, Las Vegas. Go ahead, segue off that. It's
it's actually the Serbia of North America is northern Colorado. Very similar.
Really?
Very.
How is that? That's where I'm at.
In terms of just your visual, your landscape, what you're looking at. They're very, very similar places, actually.
Excellent. I mean, I do eat a lot of cabbage, so I mean, it makes sense.
You just got to start distilling your own fruit brandy, and you're right there.
I have a spare bathroom, so I mean, I'm getting it going. I'm actually getting it going. The Rockies are getting it going tomorrow. In fact, there is a 11 a.m. DNVR Rockies podcast. Susie's going to be taking it over as I'm taking a couple days for myself ahead of the All-Star break. We're going to have some really great coverage coming from Seattle with the Futures game on Saturday, the draft on Sunday, Derby on Monday, the All-Star game itself on Tuesday, maybe not starring, but featuring Elias Diaz, the Rockies' lone representative. So Susie's going to be holding down the fort in a major way. But the series does start tomorrow in Houston. Kyle Freeland on the bump, 12 runs of support in his last 8 starts for Kyle Freeland. That's rough. Freeland, I mean, that's a razor-thin margin of error for him right now.
Yeah, that's brutal.
That's really rough. And to be determined who's going to be starting for the Houston Astros. I don't know if they're going all bullpen games, but off day on Monday, off day on Thursday, All-Star break coming up. Brandon Bielak, maybe, JP France for them. And then Chase Anderson will be starting on Wednesday. Weird start times too. 2 o'clock, 2:10 on Tuesday, 12:10 on Wednesday. I know, you're getting ready for your trip to Vegas. But Brendan, I was curious if you are going to be at least somewhat interested or keeping your eye out on a potential rematch from the World Baseball Classic, Daniel Bard and Jose Altuve. For anyone that might not remember, Bard got a little bit wild in one of his appearances for Team USA, hit Altuve on the hand, cost him the miss several weeks.
Yeah,
and that really kind of got the anxiety going for Daniel Bard, where he missed a lot of the month of April with those anxiety issues. So we could see them both on the field against one another once again over the next couple of days.
Man, I did not realize that was a source of the anxiety or something that exacerbated it. That's really interesting. I mean, I knew he needed that time, but I've actually, when you were little and you pitched and you hit a guy by accident, did you feel like the worst person in the world?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I hate getting hit. I used to hate that. I was afraid of the ball. It was awful. Yeah. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that my dad reminded me, like, oh, you don't remember that one game? I go, what do you mean? And the ball was coming at me. Instead of like turning my back, I opened my body up and it hit me in the chest.
Yeah.
And ever since then, and so I blocked that out of my memory. And
so
ever since then, I always would kind of put my foot in the bucket, and I could never really do it at the plate. And so I always gravitated towards pitching.
I feel you. Well, when I went wild and I would hit, especially when it was a friend, because I'm like, oh man, I know that hurt. Anyway, the point is, it's interesting to think of that little dynamic existing on such a consequential and larger scale with MLB players. That's actually kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And obviously we've got guys who've gotten hit in the face by a ball and they have to overcome that. Ryan Feltner, I mean, part of his comeback trajectory after the small skull fracture that he sustained.
How do they ever come back and do it again?
How do you do that? Yeah. Even if you have some kind of protection. I mean, obviously the hitters already have that. They've got the C flaps now to protect the face, but you just have to get past that. You have to figure out a way, or else your career could be done.
And again, I mean, baseball's so interesting, but the mental aspect of sports, this is all the little things you just kind of forget to think, you don't factor that in. But like you said, even in Little League, one fateful at bat could change the way you approach being in the box for the rest of your Little League career. If I would never pitch again, I don't even know if I would get on a field again after taking a comebacker off the head. That's, I don't know, just crazy to me.
There have been a lot of baseball players who've come out within the last year, and even more so since Daniel Bard came out and said, yeah, I need to take some time for myself to get myself mentally balanced. And it is anxiety issues, at least putting a broad word on what that is. So baseball has kind of started to embrace that just a little bit. Have there been any inroads in basketball, or is it still very much suck it up, buttercup, go out there, be tough? That is the only option.
It's changed a bit. Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, I think, were a few years ago faces of an open sort of movement about like Players Tribune pieces about dealing with anxiety and depression. And again, just reminding us that like these are real human beings, no matter how charmed their lives may be or that they're playing a game, like these things are happening. And look, man, that stuff affects how I work every day. So I don't know where I get off like thinking that it doesn't affect them. You know what I mean? So there has been a lot of crossroads made in that. I would think baseball is such a long season and mental game, and especially for pitchers too, that I'm sure this almost golf-like kind of internal battle, of your muscle memory knows exactly what to do, but you get in your own way, and the way that can just sort of crater your confidence and your mental health. It's also fascinating to me.
It is. Let folks know about all the fascinating coverage coming up for DNVR Nuggets, because championship is in the bag, but according to Michael Malone, they're not done yet.
They are not, and we are not either. You can follow us at DNVR_Nuggets on Twitter. We are on this same YouTube channel, live 5 times a week. And in 4 days, we're headed to Vegas for Summer League. We're sponsored by Circa. Shout out Circa this time around. We really appreciate you. If you're headed out there, come see us. Come say, hey, we're going to learn about our prospects, but maybe also just revel in the title a little bit longer, just a little long.
That's great. It's worth it. Yeah, there you go. It's part 2 of the parade.
Yep.
I like that. That's great. I like all the stuff that you guys have to say. Add us on Twitter at DNVR_Rockies and things you say to me. Again, at the DMs, Nikola Jokić, best NBA player in the game.
Hey, I don't think anyone's going to argue. No one's going to argue with you right now, man. It's
not in our market, at least. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Some folks in Philly, scrunch their face up a little bit, but that's besides the point. At Patrick D. Lyons on Twitter. And Brendan, I think you might know, or maybe you don't, what you say about a really good baseball podcast in regards to momentum.
Well, it's only as good as your next show, right?
And it's going to be a great one, because it's going to be Susie at 11 a.m. right here on the DNVR Sports Channel live on YouTube.
Patrick.